Well, we're on another adventure to Gettysburg. This one's a bit of a business trip, but we're going to try to hit in a few historic stops and make some content along the way. I'm flying solo this time, and I just got breakfast. Although it's a late breakfast, it's almost 10 o'clock, but I've been up since 7:30. Oh, I can't wait to get to Gettysburg, but I got to be quite honest, I don't feel like driving the 3+ hours that way. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what we can see along the way. Let's see if I can stay awake. Well, I'm going to have to stay awake. I got to get to Gettysburg before I can crash on the bed in the hotel. Well, now it's approaching 12 o'clock on this Friday. Now we're in McConnellsburg, Pennsylvania. Interesting little detail, this town was actually the site of one of the early skirmishes of the Gettysburg campaign. The first two Confederate deaths of that campaign, first two Confederate deaths in Pennsylvania are buried here, actually just a little ways from the sheets where I'm standing. But I want to get back on the road. That'll be a future video. So yeah, we're going to go back through McConnellsburg, get back on 30. We're 2/3 of the way there. One more hour. Something I just noticed. Remember I mentioned there were multiple tracks back here on the east side of the station so they can switch the train around because there was no runaround track at the time. Well, you'll notice down here, notice how you have these peculiar laid bricks. Almost looks like railroad ties. So I believe this is them representing that spur track that was used to alter the alignment of locomotives to get the trains ready to go back to Hanover Junction. So we're just off of what would essentially be East Main Street in Gettysburg, and one of the placards here is talking about the former site of the Globe Theater. And I am reading from the placard down here, provided by Main Street, Gettysburg. This was the site of the Globe Inn, one of Gettysburg's oldest hotels. Originally owned and operated by James Getty, who founded his community back in the late 1700s. And traditionally, this was seen as the headquarters for the local Democratic Party, which is why, when the Battle of Gettysburg occurred, this was a regular hangout for some of the Confederate officers during the occupation of the town on July 1st and 3rd, 1863. Now, after the battle was over, because of the Globe Taverns association with the Democratic Party, and thereby seen as a Confederate stronghold, angry Republicans filed charges against its proprietor, Charles Will, and his son for harboring the enemy. Army Provost Marshal found the claims groundless, though, and dismissed them against the charges, with the comment, "I'm convinced there is political feeling between you people." The building remained standing, though it was greatly modified over the years before succumbing to fire in 1968. Just walking past, I don't even have notes on him, but this is, according to the headstone, John Nix Jones, who was the borough's first black police officer. Born in 1913, passed away in 1985. these are interesting. You'll notice, these obelisks with holes for them? I wonder if those were for fence railings way back in the day when the cemetery was an active operation. Well, we got into Gettysburg around, let's say 2 o'clock. And after getting some much needed lunch at the Lincoln Diner, and we've just been walking around town. Probably either we're going to get a proper retracing history of the streets of Gettysburg Volume 2, or we'll just lump the little bits of me talking about the placards. Maybe I'll put that in for trip tapes. Either place, getting content filmed. We just got back from the Lincoln Cemetery. That's going to be a fun video to make. I've always wanted to go and visit that. I've known about that for about a year. But just every time we come out, I always neglect it or put it off to focus on something else. So it's a 60-degree day in the end of January of 2024. A good day to go out and record Lincoln Cemetery for retracing history. We got our meeting tomorrow, which is the primary reason I'm even in Gettysburg. Didn't plan to come out here for a Redoubt Productions trip. It's for a business trip. But we'll see if I have some time Saturday to squeeze in some sightseeing. And then Sunday, we have in theory, a lot to hit on the way home.
Come on over. For a small fee, Zoltar will give you a wealth of wisdom.
If you ever decide to visit Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, a little bit insider secret. Well, it's not really a secret. This is the Racehorse Alley Parking Plaza. Now, you're probably wondering, why am I talking about a parking plaza? No, it's not a historical site, but it sits just behind the Gettysburg Hotel, which rests along the town square. If you are looking for parking in downtown, please, for your safety, I advise not parking along the street. US 30 is very busy through downtown Gettysburg, as is Route 15 that goes from north to south. Choose parking here at the plaza. And I was just told by a friend of mine who was staying overnight, if you do board at the Gettysburg Hotel, it appears, don't quote me, but it appears that you get 24-hour parking even after you check out. So definitely recommend, if you're coming to Gettysburg for the day or plan to stay overnight, remember about the parking plaza on Racehorse Alley. And if you thought there was no historical value to the property, well, guess what? There's a marker right by the plaza reminding people that park here that this was once the site of Samuel Getty's Tavern, which on June 24, 1775 was the mustering site for Captain Mitchell Doodle's company of riflemen, who would soon enlist from the Marsh Creek settlement in prompt response to the call for volunteers from the Continental Congress at the start of the American Revolution. And it is Samuel Getty who was one of the founders of the town. I mean, Gettysburg. I think you could tell why this location is important to Gettysburg history.
Background. With the light blue. Yeah, with the French blue.
Bummer. What's the alternative?
So, this has happened to me pretty often, where I'll hang my bag up that holds my notes and phone charger. I'll usually hang it up on a chair when I'm at a restaurant, completely forget about it. Then usually remember about an hour later. I don't know if it's a good or bad thing. I've no longer panicked about this because it's happened so often. So I just made a call to the one pub in town. And I'm like, yeah, I lost it. I know where it is. I'll be back in a half hour. So if you ever see a green army bag with the 2nd Corps badge on it, that's property of Redoubt Productions. You know who to return to. And this placard here reminds all visitors about a particular individual by the name of Robert Glass, whose contributions assisted in acquiring and restoring his property to its original battle appearance. I just had a moment while I was recording. I was in the middle of talking about Lieutenant Stewart the first time around and him deploying the guns out here, and then I went quiet. When I come out to these historic sites, it doesn't just have to be Gettysburg, but places where you have these very large events or events that will have monumental consequences down the line. I go quiet. I'm speechless. You have to imagine what it looked like out there on July 1st, 1863. And it's unimaginable, thinking tens of thousands of men in blue coats trying to hold back tens of thousands of men in gray and butternut. It's unimaginable that people would march in front of these guns that at far distance are firing solid iron cannonballs that are moving at 600 miles per hour, capable of taking somebody's head off. And then if they got close enough and they hadn't died or got wounded yet, then they're dealing with cancer shot. Those cannons turned into one giant shotgun, spraying projectiles across the faces of the infantry lines. How did people do it? It's unimaginable that these people existed. And yet, we know all that happened right out there, and it happened to, well, in this whole town collectively, over 100,000 Americans. How did people like that exist? And where did those people disappear over the years? Where is that endurance? Where is that stamina? Where is that tenacity? Where did that go between the 19th and the 21st century? I'm not saying I want a civil war. That's actually what I'm trying to say I don't want. But where did this generation disappear?
So completely different. I mean, they converge nicely, which is not something that I intentionally planned.
Well, first 2 days of this trip, I was blessed to have nice sunny weather in January. The first day on our trip when we got into town, that is when I filmed the Lincoln Cemetery video. And the second day, I did the Robert E. Lee video, and that was a complete spur of the moment. I wasn't anticipating to stop there, but I'm like, I'm here and take advantage of the weather. Well, Pennsylvania winter's returned, and I know most people think Pennsylvania winter is heavy snow, and we had that last week. It's more just cold, miserable rain like this. So it's not pretty often, it just looks ugly like this. So I think our outdoor filmings are done for this trip. Well, I'm unsure what I'm gonna do today, so right now we're walking through the peach orchard. I don't know how long I'm gonna last. It's windy, it's rainy. Like I mentioned earlier in the hotel, this is January in Pennsylvania. It's not pretty. So just gonna kind of look around. Not planning to make any proper video here, but I figured it'd be nice to add to the B-roll. Plus, I can never pass up an opportunity to talk about Dan the Man Sickles. Remind people that it was here in the peach orchard on July 2nd, 1863, that the, quote, greatest general in the Union Army of the Potomac decided to move his entire corps from their original positions down at the base of Cemetery Ridge up here on top of the peach orchard. Now, they weren't all here. The left flank of the 3rd Corps extended down into those woodlots over there down to the base of Little Round Top. And then the other half kind of extended up along the highway here. The reason he did it, because he thought, well, I need to have higher ground to see the enemy. And he was fearful of what may happen if Confederates located not too far from us, alarmingly, on Seminary Ridge, got possession of this. So this could become a artillery platform and a base to launch close assaults on the Union line. The problem with moving out here is, as you can see, we're pretty exposed. Yes, we are on high ground, but we're kind of a bald spot now in the Union line if we're Dan Sickles. And to make matters worse for Dan, just as he maneuvered his troops to this location, General James Longstreet of the Confederate Army was launching a massive assault on the Union left flank, coming in an echelon attack, focusing on the Little Round Top as well as this region. So essentially, I've coined this a few times. Essentially, imagine Longstreet being a sledgehammer to the Union line and buffing out this dent that Sickles had created. A dent that was quite a headache for the Union commander here, George Gordon Meade. Here we got a monument to Hampton's Battery, Pennsylvania Light Artillery. We got some reproduced artillery pieces right here as well. Mustered in October 8th, 1861. Re-enlisted February 27th, 1864. And then he mustered out in June of 1865. One of the batteries that had the inevitable task of trying to stem a massive assault by Confederates right from that tree line there. And I don't know if it shows up on the camera or not, but the more I come to the Peach Orchard, the more I am alarmed how close we are to the Confederate line. They were coming out in full force when they attacked Dan the Man. Well, it's kind of hard to see through my glasses, which are now completely covered in water, but I do believe this is the 68th Pennsylvania Infantry Monument, otherwise known as Scott Legion. And it's really hard to see with the rain, but they list what they were doing here at the Battle of Gettysburg. 1st Brigade, 1st Division of the 3rd Corps. And there's some of the engagements the 68th were involved with, just besides Gettysburg. There's nothing on the back. Just keep going. Ah, here we are. Recruited in the counties of Philadelphia, Montgomery, and Chester. Mustered in September 2nd, 1862. And they left in June of 1865. Total enrollment, 1,049. Killed and died of wounds, 10 officers and 58 men. Total of 68 wounded. There's some more casualties down there. And I believe that's total casualties for the war, not just here at Gettysburg. If you see in the distance where that car's parked, that particular monument, that is for the Excelsior Brigade, which that was the brigade that Dan the Man was attached to at the start of the American Civil War. And there's some controversy over who really was in charge. Sickles viewed himself as the de facto leader of the brigade at the start of the war, but he had quite a hard time getting his commission confirmed. I forget what rank he was for most of his tenure with the Excelsior Brigade, but it wasn't a rank you would expect commanded a whole brigade, and there was some infighting as a result of that. It seems overall, though, that his men, at least at the start of the war and his brigade, respected him, which is interesting considering how scandalous Dan the Man was. But to his credit, he tried to make sure his brigade was the best outfitted, or as best he could outfit them. I mean, after all, they are his brigade, and he wanted to make sure them potential voters after the war are going to be very happy with him. All right, so yeah, that exploration had to be aborted. It's pretty cold out there, guys. I miss that 60-degree weather. I keep saying that in these trip tapes. I miss the weather. It was so beautiful the past 2 days. I gotta stop lamenting though. I gotta do that now. But yeah, also my camera, which is a smartphone, does not do too well in the cold. I walked out, had 85%. I wasn't even out there like 15 minutes. Walked back, I'm down to 65%. I need a new phone. I need a lot of things. I need coffee. Oh, look, coffee. Oh, coffee's right here. All right. Well, before we bail on the battlefield, I am gonna take you over to the site of Dan Sickles' oofing. Behold. Here's the headquarters monument for Dan the Man Sickles, though his headquarters was only going to be here very briefly in the late afternoon of July 2nd. This is one of the more iconic structures in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. This is the Trossel Barn, and it's situated just to the, I'm gonna have to think here, just to the north of the Peach Orchard, which is back over in that direction. And I think you can tell why it's pretty iconic. Note the cannon hole that's in the side of the barn. And this was also the site of several photographs taken by Alexander Gardner in the aftermath of the Battle of Gettysburg. Predominantly of a lot of dead horses that were strewn around this region. Part of the reason there was so many horses dead in this region, this was the site of several artillery batteries for the Union Army in their failed defense of the peach orchard. And if we just keep heading down this direction, there's actually a monument to one of those. So this is one of the markers for the 9th Massachusetts Battery. And if you recall our episode on retracing history relating to the 1st Minnesota, I was talking about how that infantry regiment, which only numbered a little over 200 guys, were thrown at over 1,000 Confederate soldiers in a brigade that was assaulting Cemetery Ridge after the 3rd Corps fell apart here on the peach orchard. Well, they weren't the only ones that were thrown out to basically be sacrificed to give the Union time to reinforce Cemetery Ridge. And the 9th Massachusetts faced a similar fate as the 1st Minnesota. Of course, the obvious difference is we're talking about an artillery battery and not an infantry. So these guys were forced to hold out to the last man. And if you see a lot of these photographs taken in the Trossel farm, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of horses strewn around here. Likely a lot of those are the horses that were meant to pull the guns of the 9th Massachusetts out of here, but, well, you know what happened to them. Well, here it is. The monument. This is maybe my favorite monument due to who it's attached to at Gettysburg, albeit it's very simplistic. This marks the approximate site where Dan Sickles was wounded on July 2nd, 1863. So as the fence on the peach orchard, which is over in that direction, was completely falling apart, Sickles, of course, riding back and forth, trying to rally his corps to hold. He's trying to send couriers off to call for reinforcements. And though some of those reinforcements will end up fighting in this peach orchard action, it will be a little bit too late to hold this ground. Sickles is going to be directing artillery batteries such as the 9th Massachusetts down here. And I was reading the Park Service sign down by the barn. And imagine the horror of these guys that are down in this gully with these guns or up here by the barn. And just like how Seminary Ridge is so close to the peach orchard, look how relatively close we are to the peach orchard. You know, it is a far distance for the Confederates to assault, but if you're a Union gunner here or a Union infantryman, you're not going to hear it far before you're going to see it. And when you can see the Confederates, it's a little too late for your situation. That's what I'm trying to summarize is. Again, it's just one of them when you stand out here in the battlefield and you just are here and you're putting yourself in the shoes of these guys. I don't know how they could stand and fight and basically facing death. You're facing death. I am right now facing death if I'm here July 2nd, 1863. But don't tell Dan Sickles that. So yeah, Dan rides out here trying to rally the men, completely ignoring all of the shells that are flying around him. Confederate gunners are probably starting to get up pretty close up there along the road there on the ridge. And a piece of exploding shell is going to detonate right next to his leg. The shell explodes, fragments, destroying the lower half of Sickles' leg. The horse is going to fall down over with Sickles. Now, instead of probably the fair enough reaction of freaking out, oh my God, my leg has just been decimated, I just lose my leg. No, that's not what Sickles does. Sickles, gets medical assistance. He is taken off the battlefield in a stretcher while calmly smoking a cigar. You see why I like talking about Dan the Man Sickles so much. I mean, although his movements cause great stress for the Union Army and many consider nearly jeopardized the Battle of Gettysburg. It's just such an entertaining story to tell. This is how you get people into history, folks. Talking about regiments and troop movements, that's going to bore people. Dates, that's going to bore people. Talk about Dan Sickles, Democratic politician who slept with just about every woman he could find to make his way go up in the ranks of politics, got away with murder on an insanity plea, ends up commanding Union troops at the Battle of Gettysburg, the largest battle in the Western Hemisphere, gets wounded, and what else happens afterwards? Well, his leg is preserved to this very day, and you can visit it in Washington, D.C. at the National Medical Museum. And Sickles was always disappointed that they only preserved the leg bones. They did not preserve the feet bones. He was always upset by that. And one more tale to spin about Dan Sickles while we're here. You'll notice that his monument's not that fancy, and you'd think, well, for somebody with such leverage in politics before, during, and after the Civil War, you'd think he would have a giant statue to him. No. There's most other Corps commanders have a statue, not Sickles here at Gettysburg. You want to know why? Well, this story, we'll be honest, is a bit mythologized. We don't know how truthful it is, but I'm going to say it anyways. It is said that at one of the reunions here at Gettysburg, when somebody asked him, why don't you have your own monument? He raised out of the seat and said, the whole battlefield's my monument. And the reason he would have said that was he was a key figure of early preservation movements here at Gettysburg, helping to get the Gettysburg Memorial Preservation Association kick-started. He was the president at one point, and he also had to abdicate that presidency due to embezzling funds. Dan Sickles. He's why we have the battlefield today preserved. So this is interesting. This is an example of a 3-inch Confederate iron rifle. It was manufactured sometime in '62 at the Traeger Iron Works, which was the primary iron works for ordnance for the Confederacy, just outside of Richmond. Well, in 1862, there was let's just say, a miscommunication between the proprietor of the foundry, who went off to fight for the Confederate Army briefly, and his workers, and they used the wrong furnace to cast 3-inch rifles, and they started bursting. And there was actually a lot of flack in the Confederate papers claiming that he was a traitor, so he had to run back and fix all the matter. Well, according to the signage here, it seems that not all of those faulty rifles were fixed, as at least one 3-inch rifle burst here at the Battle of Gettysburg. And it's the only known Confederate 3-inch rifle left here. The Confederates just abandoned it in Gettysburg when they evacuated. Alright, just some parting views of the battlefield west of town. We're about to get back on US 30 and head her home. Driving on Reynolds Avenue. If you look to your left, that is what some call the McPherson's Woods, or Herbst Woods. Wow. It could be called both. It's in that woodlot where Joshua Reynolds, the commander of the 1st Corps, was killed just a few minutes after arriving on the battlefield, July 1st, 1863. One of my more invested stories, the ones I usually research, happened down in there as well, and that was the fight between the 24th Michigan and the 26th North Carolina, the bloodiest regimental v. regimental fight at Gettysburg. So I promised I was trying to get out of Gettysburg, and I was planning to turn left on the Chambersburg Pike. I don't know, something's up with the light. The red light's not working or something. So I kind of pulled a bonsai charge after a minute across 30, which is a rare thing to achieve. So proof I survived that. And we're just going to make another quick pit stop. We're near Oak Hill, or otherwise known as Oak Ridge right now. And once more, I'm reading from the lovely National Park Service placards. So these words aren't entirely my own. But around 2 o'clock on July 1st, 1863, out in these fields was a useless slaughter, when the Confederate Brigade of Alfred Iverson, which consisted of 1,300 North Carolinians, crossed these fields toward Oak Ridge. Okay, so that's actually Oak Ridge. Oh man, I'm already messed up. Sorry guys, I'm standing on McPherson's Ridge. That is Oak Ridge, which is separated from True Seminary Ridge by the railroad cut. So these Confederates were hoping that they can attack this ridge, and they were going to try to outflank the Union, because they thought the Union line was only on the west side of town. Well, Iverson was in for a rude awakening, because as these North Carolinians get close to Oak Ridge, and there's actually a stone wall over there, out of nowhere, hundreds of Union soldiers rise up. These were men of General Henry Braxton's brigade, who had used the wall for cover and lured Iverson into this location, which quickly became a killing field. The North Carolinians stuck at the bottom of that swell with the only option of either falling back or trying to continue on, and most certainly being killed or captured. Private John D. Vaughter of the 88th PA said, "They came sweeping on in magnificent order, colors in the front. We waited quietly for the enemy to come within range, and at 80 yards, the Union troops rose and fired, striking down more than 500 Confederates, wow, in one blast. Within a terrible span of no more than 10 minutes, Iverson's brigade had lost some 903 officers and men." And the action up here is particularly important to me because up there with Braxton was the 11th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry, commanded by Richard Coulter. Richard Coulter's regiment is who I portray when I do Living History, at least most often. That's the unit we represent. Technically, the 11th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry, Company C. We've also done Company E. We used to do the 116th as well, which was an Irish Brigade regiment. So, yeah, the unit I typically portray, that is where they fought here at Gettysburg on July 1st, 1863. I just wrapped up filming in front of the SB house. I tried to park right on the street. There were spots, but I think it's just late in the day and parallel parking's not working with my brain. So I ended up parking down in the Fort Bedford Museum lot. We've actually visited here before. If you remember a few years back, there was an artifact highlight episode. It's one of my favorite museums. So if you've not had the chance to visit, please do so. Then you can go up and explore the house where George Washington had his headquarters during the Whiskey Rebellion. Or, well, not go inside. You get to look outside and see its wonderful fieldstone surface. But we're down here along the Juniata River. I did have a brief moment when I came down. I'm like, hopefully I can film this before this all gets flooded and my car gets washed down into the... Will this get flushed down to the Chesapeake? Or no, this would get flushed down to the Potomac.